Luann, I
Yeah.
need to share my screen, but I getting a message saying that the host has disabled any participants from sharing their screen.
Okay, I just enabled it.
Okay.
And the live stream is ready whenever you're ready.
Okay. Welcome, everybody. This is the December 9th, 8th meeting of the Planning, Resource and Development Committee. Welcome. With that, we'll call the roll. I can see from the camera that all members of the committee are present, including our county board chair. So we will go ahead. Approval of the minutes, November 10th, 2020.
Mr. Chairman, I will move approval of the November 10 minutes.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
What, could I just interrupt? Could I interrupt real quick? Those meeting minutes actually are dated November 9th.
All right.
If I look down here, so
Oh, yes, they are.
we want to make that change, I think, before you.
Why don't you approve the minutes as amended to November 9th, Diane, if that's okay.
Yeah, I move as amended.
Is there a second to the amended motion?
Mr. Chairman, I will second the motion.
Thank you, Supervisor
Mr.
Anderson.
Chair, I'd like to make a comment.
Sure.
On the minutes of November 10th, it has me as not being there, and I was at the meeting.
Okay.
True.
So we'll make note of that as we without objection, can we revise the minutes for September 10th to include Supervisor Bjork as participating?
I'll accept that change.
Okay. Anybody have an objection to that? Then that's what we'll do. Thanks, Gary. So we have a motion and a second. We've had some comments. Is there any other comment? All in favor of approving, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, motions are approved. Minutes are approved. The next item is a little confusing, and I'll ask Barbara to walk us through this. Apparently, we have a error in the minutes of September 22nd. Unbelievable that we could have overlooked that, but perhaps we did. Barbara, you want to discuss that?
Yes, thank you. So the minutes of September 22nd, at the September 22nd meeting, the committee went through the valuations of the properties with dwellings on it, the more valuable properties, and property 4 in the report to the committee, the valuation recommended was $5,000, which the appraiser had suggested would be the value if the house in Boyceville on Main Street would be gutted. There's a lot of refuge in there, but the committee had discussion and it determined to go with the higher recommendation as if the house wasn't a complete loss and needed to be raised. And so that was $25,000. And so that is on property 4. So the committee voted and approved a valuation of $25,000 for that. And so my proposal to the committee today is to amend the September 22nd meetings accordingly, setting the minimum bid for property 4 at $25,000 as the committee voted on, and then approve that, and they could be posted as amended minutes, but they wouldn't need to come back before the committee again to approve the amendment. This would suffice, and then it could be posted at the clerks and be advertised that way. For the committee's information, all the properties have been advertised on the internet and in the paper, and I have been showing the properties, and it's been shown at the $25,000. That's what I've been telling people, and what was advertised as that. That was my belief, is what the committee had voted on.
Okay. Committee have any thoughts or recollections or on that item?
If I could just make a comment, Mr. Chair, I did review the minutes yesterday, and everything is correct except for the dollar amount. There was some discussion. Supervisor Kinnear did make the motion, Supervisor Bjork seconded, and it was very clear the motion was for 25,000. I can confirm that from the YouTube video.
That is my recollection of it too. Anybody else have a problem with this? So in that vein, then, would there be a motion to amend the minutes to include that change?
Supervisor Kinnear moves.
Is there a second?
To make the amendment.
I'll
Thank you.
second, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion to amend and reapprove the minutes from September 22nd, reflecting the change we just made? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Thank you. We have no public comment and no public hearing today.
Tom, you're muted.
What happened?
Somehow I muted myself, I'm sorry. We have no public comment or public hearing today. But with regard to the rest of the agenda, we do have several topics where we have citizens who would like to make comments on topics that are of concern to them. So in the interest of respecting their time, I would suggest a modification of the agenda. We could, I think, very quickly go through under 6A and B, those reports, and then move item D up ahead to be in before item C. And we could, no, excuse me. We could move number 8 at that point in time up to being heard after 6B, and then move 6C and D down to the end of the meeting, if that's okay. Any objection? Okay. Without objection, then that's what we'll do. So we'll move quickly to go through the monthly reports from staff, starting with the Register of Deeds. Are there any questions, Heather, in this report?
Good morning, everyone. I'm here if you have any questions. I did attach our budgeted expenditures and revenues, and as you can see, our revenues have exceeded our budgeted revenues, so that's a good thing.
Looks good.
So
Any questions?
I have a question for Heather.
Gary.
I've heard a lot of on radio about how some of your register, your property listing can be hacked, and somebody can go in there and fake a false quitclaim deed, and then borrow money on that. Is a homeowner like notified if there's any kind of action on that property?
Typically there isn't, but we do have a property fraud alert system that you can sign on to receive notifications if a document is recorded with your name. So that's an option if you'd like to sign on with property fraud alert, and you'll just simply receive an alert if any documents are recorded with your name. So it's an option for you. It is available. But unless you've signed up for property fraud alert, there would not be a notification process.
Is there any cost to signing up for that alert?
There is no cost. Nope.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And is that, if I may, do you sign up in your office, or where do you go to get that?
Yep, you can certainly just call our office, or you can go online on the Dunn County website to the Register of Deeds page and sign on there, or you can just simply contact us and we'll get you signed up.
Okay.
Thank you. It's very helpful. Any other questions? Okay. Thanks, Heather. Survey Division? Any questions? Okay. Any questions? Environmental Services Planning and Zoning? Any questions? Thank you. Land Conservation? Any questions?
Tom?
Yep.
I would just like to add that those changes that we put, that I referred to there in the manure storage ordinance, Nick felt that those were very minuscule changes, and those are in the final draft that was published.
Right.
That will be going to public hearing in 2 weeks from today.
Okay.
And that public hearing has been advertised last week in the Dunn County News, and then it'll be in tomorrow's edition, which it had to be at least a week prior to the meeting.
Okay.
And then this item on the 5-year review, that'll be April. I think you should pay a little attention to that because one of the committee members will be required to be participating with the new county conservationists, I would assume, on that review. So,
where does that happen at their annual meeting, or is that?
No, this is the state Land and Water Board, and they have 4 meetings a year, and it will be a virtual meeting.
Okay.
So, I think you can set it up in the training room or just like one of these meetings. But
okay.
Okay.
Thanks for the heads up. Appreciate it.
So the question, Dan, is that April 6, 2021?
Yes.
Okay, it says 2020, and I thought, boy, I missed it again.
Oh no, this is 21. That's my mistake. It said that.
It's that time of year where that mistake gets made a lot.
Yes, 2021. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? All right, then I think we've reviewed the staff reports, and I do apologize. My intention was to deal with A,
Tom,
B, and D.
If I could just interrupt quickly, we do have one left, solid waste and recycling.
Oh, I'm sorry. Solid waste.
Supervisor Kinnear, I have a question.
Yes.
Mr. Chair. I'm just curious if since Morgan has written this is to Morgan, if there's any update or any further information on especially Stout regarding using the site.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we got you, Morgan. Go ahead.
Sorry about that. Mike, what we're doing is we've sent out a letter to all interested parties. We've got UW Stout interested in the lease option, obviously, and we have multiple private haulers interested in purchase or lease agreements for the transfer station. So last week we sent out an official letter to all interested parties asking them to submit a written proposal, not an RFP. We're not at that stage yet, but submit an official written proposal with their interest in the facility, what they would like to do. There's a couple questions in that letter for them to answer, and then those will be due December 31st, 2020. And at the January 5th meeting of the Solid Waste Recycling Management Board, we will review those letters of interest, and that'll give the board a better idea of what the interest is from the multiple people that are looking into acquiring it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Morgan. Any other questions? Any other questions?
Tom, you're muted again.
I know. I'm sorry about that. Keep muting somehow here. Any other questions? Thanks, Morgan. Thanks, Mike. I guess my stated earlier my agenda intention, and what I would like to do is simply move item C, 6C, to the end of the agenda. Because that may involve some discussion, and we can go through the rest of it, I think, fairly quickly. So that would get us to item 6D, update on the Argo repurchase request. Corporate Counsel, Nick on?
I was going to speak to that, Supervisor. Okay. So the committee had previously at the September 8th meeting approved a repurchase from the Argos, brother and sister, for their property that had been taken in the 2020 in rem proceeding. And if the committee recalls, the administrative fee was set at 5% or $7,060, and the back taxes, interest, and penalty were just over $21,000. And so I just wanted to report to the committee. Sometimes these repurchases are granted and then individuals don't follow through, and then you learn about that when we're selling it to the general public. I just wanted to report to the committee that the Argos did pay $28,455.29 and have received their deed and successfully repurchased.
Great. Thanks, Barbara. Any questions? Okay. We have no items under 7, so we'll go to the consideration of actions to be taken. A, review and take action on a variance request from Donald and Tanya Larson. Tom, you want to set this up for us?
Sure. Tanya Larson is here with us in the meeting, as well as Wendy Dahlman, who is, I believe, the realtor for the transaction or proposed transaction. So what I'll do is I'll go through my staff report, and if there's any questions of me, you certainly can stop me at any time. And then if Tanya, if the applicant would like to speak and or Ms. Dahlman, that's certainly something that you could entertain, Mr. Chair. So I'll start with my presentation here. So the applicant is Don and Tanya Larson from Ridgeland. They own some vacant land along County Highway F that they would like to sell. It's located in Section 21, Town of Sheridan. The piece they're looking at selling is approximately 13 to 14 acres. And they are asking for a variance to create a new lot, which does not meet our current requirement of 10,000 square feet of contiguous land lying a vertical distance of 2 feet above the regional floodplain as required by 16.4, .03 of Chapter 16. So I'll give you a little background here. While I'm reading the background, I'm going to go down to another slide here, just so it makes a little more sense. A lot of information to present here, so bear with me. Here is the property. So Don and Tanya Larson, the applicant, own approximately 85 acres of contiguous property within the northeast 1/4 of Section 21, Town of Sheridan. That property is currently zoned general ag. The applicant would like to create a new lot roughly 13 to 14 acres in size. And as you can see on the screen I have in front of me, that new parcel would be bounded on the south and west by the Hay River, on the north by the north line, their north property line, which is this yellow line, and on the east by the County Highway F runs through here. The proposed new lot that I'm showing you here is roughly 13 to 14 acres in size. The entire property or proposed lot that they're trying to create is encumbered by the 100-year floodplain as mapped by FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency. DNR mapped wetlands also make up a large portion of this subject property. I'm going to slide down here to another map Just want to show you the extent of the wetlands on the property. So again, this is the piece bounded by the river, the county highway, and the property line. And as you can see, looks like maybe 80% or so of the property is encumbered by this green shaded area, which are wetlands. So the creation of this new lot that they're looking to do, so by creating this new lot, it requires a certified survey map. That certified survey map is going to have to meet all the requirements of Chapter 16. Section 16.403 of the ordinance states in part, all parcels shall contain a minimum of 10,000 square feet of contiguous land lying a vertical distance of 2 feet above the floodplain. Right now, the property, no part of the property whatsoever meets that requirement, not even 1 square foot. So the Larsens have decided to ask the committee or petition the committee for a variance of that section of the ordinance. They would still do a certified survey map. It's just the map would be allowed to be approved and get recorded without meeting this section of our ordinance. So section 16.4.05 of our ordinance allows for a variance and is worded as follows. Where in the judgment of the department and or committee, it would be inappropriate to apply literally the provisions of Chapter 16 because exceptional or undue hardship would result. The staff and or committee may waive or modify any county requirement to the extent deemed just and proper. When such relief is granted, it shall be without detriment to the public good, without impairment to the intent and purpose of this ordinance. So the Environmental Services Department has reviewed the Larsens request. And the comments we have are that the purpose of floodplain regulations to the greatest extent possible is to discourage development in areas that will be impacted by flooding, in this case, the 100-year flood event. The entire subject parcel is located within the floodplain and below the base elevation. The map I have in front of you now shows cross sections in red. So the 985-foot cross section is where, that's the elevation where the water will rise in a 100-year event. And again, this is a very dramatic event. It's only going to happen once every 100 years. It may not happen next year. It may happen 2 years from now and maybe 98 years from now. But this is the 100-year flood event, the elevation where water will rise to 985 feet. So the elevation of the proposed new lot ranges from a low of about 972 feet near the Hay River on the west side to a high of about 984 feet up here in the northeast corner. Which is the proposed building site for somebody down the road. The highest elevation of the proposed new lot is still about 1 foot below the base flood elevation of 985. So just keeping everything in perspective. The proposed new lot contains no land whatsoever that would satisfy or count towards the 10,000 contiguous square foot requirement. So that's roughly 1/4 of an acre of this new lot needs to be 2 feet higher than that 985-foot elevation, which would be 987 roughly. Right now, the only place nearby where we get that is out in the center of the county highway here, 987.5. So there are no existing uses or structures currently on the proposed new lot. Additionally, section 16.6 of the subdivision ordinance reads in part, no land which shall be held unsuitable for its proposed use for the reasons of flooding shall be developed into a minor subdivision. So the granting of a variance would not, in our opinion, staff's opinion, the granting of a variance would not promote public health, safety, and welfare. It would not encourage the most appropriate use of this land and would not provide the best possible environment for human habitation. In addition, granting a variance would be inconsistent with Chapter 16 and would set a precedent for other similar requests in the future. If, however, the applicant were granted a variance to create this new lot, any future uses would be required to meet all applicable requirements of the Dunn County zoning and floodplain ordinance. So we are here today not to, approve or discuss the zoning ordinance. We are here to approve a land division. And right now, Chapter 16, which governs all new land divisions, lists a requirement that the applicant can't meet. So we just need to keep all that in perspective. We are dealing with a land division issue today, not a zoning issue. So when we look at our variance requirements, one of them is, would it be inappropriate to apply literally the provisions of Chapter 16 because exceptional or undue hardship would result? Applying the provisions of Chapter 16 would not cause exceptional or undue hardship in this situation, we feel. Although it may not be ideal, the applicant could convey a slightly larger parcel greater than 20 acres, which would be exempt from the requirements of our ordinance. So let me just explain. Our ordinance says anytime you create a new parcel under 20 acres, a certified survey map is required. If the applicant, in this case, were to convey an additional 6 acres roughly to attach 6 more acres onto this, they wouldn't have to comply with our ordinance. Doing so, though, would force the applicant to include land on the other side of the river, which was discussed with the Larsens. And at this time, that is not an option. They simply, want their privacy, don't want another owner on the other side of the river, which is completely understandable. The variance should be without detriment to the public good and without impairment to the intent and purpose of this ordinance. So section 16.102 of our ordinance outlines the purpose of our ordinance. The purpose of the ordinance is to promote public health, safety, and general welfare, to encourage the most appropriate use of land, to provide the best possible environment for human habitation, and to conserve the value of buildings placed on the land. So item A in that section talks about reducing congestion in the streets or highways. The creation of this new lot would not create significant congestion in the streets or highways. Item B talks about furthering the orderly layout and use of land. If this new parcel were created, it is in a mapped floodplain. And so the creation of a new lot within a mapped floodplain would allow for development that is inconsistent with the purpose and intent of this chapter. So we don't feel it contributes to the orderly layout and use of land. Item C talks about securing safety, from fire, panic, and other dangers. The creation of this new lot within a mapped floodplain carries significant risks if structures are ever placed on the lot. There could potentially be a risk not only to the structures themselves, but also to the occupants of those structures. Item D talks about providing adequate light and air. The creation of a new lot would not reduce the adequacy of light and air. Avoiding undue or improper concentration of population. The creation of a new lot could potentially place population in a floodplain if the new lot were to be used for residential purposes. We need to keep that in mind. If this variance is approved, the Larsens would be able to have a certified survey map with a new parcel designated as a lot, and they could record that, and then that lot could be used for residential purposes, provided they meet the requirements of the county zoning and floodplain ordinance. Facilitating adequate provisions of transportation for transportation, water, sewer, schools, parks, playgrounds, and other public requirements. That one is really not applicable in this situation. And item G, the last item, facilitating where appropriate further re-subdivision of larger tracts into smaller parcels. Further re-subdivision of this subject property would not be appropriate given the limits of the floodplain, the substantial amount of wetland on the property, and limited access along the highway. So summing up all these variance requests and analyzing the request against the purpose of our ordinance, staff recommends denial of the variance request. The creation of a new lot in the general ag zoning district and within a mapped floodplain would be detrimental to the public good and would allow for development that is inconsistent with the purpose and intent of Chapter 16. The department would, however, support a variance request to survey the subject parcel and designate it as an outlot. By definition, an outlot is a non-buildable parcel. So we would allow the land division to happen with the stipulation that it be deemed or designated as an outlot, which would come along with certain restrictions. So that is the extent of my staff report. There's some other documents in here that we may need to refer to depending on where the discussion leads. And then there are several pages here, some supporting documents that the applicant has provided. So that concludes my report. Are there any questions for me at this time?
One question, Mr. Carlson.
Yes.
Could we hear from Dave Bartlett? I think that's his township. I'd like to hear his comments. If he's on.
Mr. Bartlett, would you care to?
Yes, I'm on. I know the property. I don't I don't remember that it's ever flooded in the time that I have been there. As far up as where in the northeast corner there, definitely it's flooded along the river. Definitely it's flooded around the building that's just south of the river there, on that little parcel. So, but I guess, I don't know, I haven't been there 100 years. So I really can't say, you know, I guess I'm learning about stuff like this. So I've got a number of thoughts, but I don't know that any of it is for this. I understand. I understand the parcel subdivision, and I understand. I'd like to hear more about, or I'd like to get to know more about if we okayed it and it couldn't be built on, whatever that that Tom talked about. So,
Okay.
but I don't know if you have specific questions about the parcel, I can try to answer that, but.
Let's, we can get back to that as we get along on our discussion. Are there other comments of Mr. Carlson from the committee at this point in time? We can again get back to them in a little while if we have to. Okay. Would I'm guessing that the applicant and perhaps their representative would like to make some comments. If so, now would be the right time.
I do have a question of Dave Bartlett. Going back to that map, you know the history of this parcel with Old County F going through that. Also, there seems to be some type of flood preventative, whether it be a dike in there or whichever that was created around or near that Old County Road. So I would just like to know the history, I guess, with that road that is in there and kind of where and when that was in there. Also, I'm looking at the parcel to the south of the river that is in the floodplain as well, and you see buildings there. If you go to the map that shows the elevations, yep, right there, the yellow, yep. You can scroll down just a smidge. On that parcel that is to the south of the river, you see 978 feet as far as the elevation on the corner of the building. The proposed building site up on the Larsens parcel is it's 4 to 6 feet above that currently. You know, that's something that I question too, and wonder, you know, and maybe this parcel or this parcel that's south of the river is grandfathered in there. You know, I don't know all the specifics about that, but that would be another question that I have. You already have a dwelling that's at a lower elevation. And then if you can go to the floodplain map where it shows the floodplain and the flood fringe as well, I think, yep, right there. So again, referring to this map where you see floodplain being the blue diagonal lines, and now you have what's called flood fringe with the dotted areas. Again, you see this parcel south of the river in the flood fringe. You have a building area there. Half of this parcel that the Larsens are proposing is in the flood fringe. So, you know, what's the determination between floodplain and flood fringe? Tom Carlson, I know that you said this is all floodplain. Well, according to this map, that's not it is true, but I don't know the difference between the flood fringe. So if somebody can explain all of these different things, I guess that's kind of where we're coming from.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Morales.
excuse me for interrupting, but could Ms. Dahlman please tell us what her interest is here? And I don't know who you are, so.
Realtor representing the Larsens.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, and I will attempt to answer some or all of these questions. Other staff may have good information they want to contribute as well. So I will try and answer the questions in the order that I remember them. One of the questions, the very first question, I believe, was the history of the county road. I don't have that readily available. If I had known this was going to come up, I could have done some research on that, brought up some old air photos. I honestly don't know when that road was realigned. We do know it's in a different location than it has been in the past. I don't know when that relocation took place. The fact that the road, though, was in a floodplain still doesn't change the fact that we have standards in our ordinance requiring certain conditions be met. As far as these berms, I know there's been a lot of discussion on berms out here. The easiest way to see them is by looking and analyzing the contour maps. So if I zoom in and, you know, the Larsens or Ms. Dahlman can correct me if I'm wrong, but from the contours, it looks like there is a berm right here, if you can see where the hand of my cursor is moving along. And then there's another substantial berm, if you will, along this water body. The top of both of those berms, or I should say the highest elevation, according to the contour data that we have, is roughly 982 feet. It's about 977 at the toe of slope. So those berms are roughly 5 feet vertical. I just want to remind everybody the top of those berms, or the highest point on those berms, is at 982, which is a full 3 feet below. Again, we're looking at a worst case event, 100-year flood event, and we've got suitability standards in our ordinance to protect the value of land and structures placed on those land and human habitation. Right now, if we had a worst case event next summer and the water gets up to 985 feet, those berms are going to be underwater. They are not going to protect the land up here that's sitting at 984 feet. They would have to form, in my opinion, and I'm not a geologist or an engineer, but in my opinion, we would have to have like a horseshoe-shaped berm completely surrounding the building site that was higher than 985 feet, and we simply don't have that. I'm not going to deny the fact there are berms on the property, but the fact is those berms are not at a high enough elevation or constructed in such a manner that would 100% protect the northeast corner of the property, which is where a building site is planned for the future. So that, I believe, was the first question. The second question, and if I'm not providing enough information or there's more questions come up, I guess please stop me, but I believe that was the first question. The second question had to do with the existing buildings south of the Hay River. Again, I haven't done a lot of research anticipating questions, and maybe I should have. So for that, I apologize. But to my recollection, this parcel down here is not a certified survey map. It did not have to comply with the provisions of our ordinance. And again, I believe that to be the case. I would have to do some research, but looking at maps in the past, I don't believe I saw a certified survey map on that parcel. Even if there were a certified survey map, chances are it was done before the adoption of our current ordinance, which was in March of 2006. These standards that I'm referring to this morning have all been adopted in our current ordinance, which took effect in March of 2006. So the parcel may in fact have been grandfathered in, if we want to use that term. And the fact that a building down here is at a lower elevation than what's being proposed up here, I guess I would just, bring up the old adage, two wrongs don't necessarily make a right. I hope I answered the question on that. And then the third question had to do, I believe, with the difference between the floodplain and then how that floodplain is broken down into its two components, in this case, the floodway and the flood fringe. So Ms. Dahlman was correct. a part of the subject property is split almost equally into the western side is floodway and the eastern side is flood fringe. And these two terms become very important in the flood ordinance. And as far as placing fill and gaining necessary permits to develop an area in the floodplain. However, the land division ordinance, which is what we're looking at today, and we need to keep these items separate. We are talking today about creating a parcel, dividing land. And I get it, zoning is part of the discussion, because if the land is divided, then that dictates how the uses for the land and what can be done with it. So going back to the land division ordinance, that ordinance, chapter 16, does not differentiate between flood fringe and floodway. It simply talks about floodplain. So, and the floodplain again is made up of these two components, the floodway and the flood fringe. So we have no standards in the ordinance for floodway or flood fringe. We have to take the ordinance for face value. So if there's more specific questions on the flood fringe and floodway, Bob Colson is also in on this meeting, and he would be the best resource to provide more information on that if I haven't addressed it adequately enough. So that's my response to the questions that were posed by Ms. Dahlman. If any other staff have comments and want to chime in, now would be the time.
Why don't we ask Mr. Colson to comment on that? Bob, could you share any thoughts you have on that?
Yes, am I?
You're mute now. Still mute. Still. Bob, you're still muted.
Bob, it appears your microphone is not working properly. Would you like to come to my office and use mine?
Why don't you call in on the phone and use that as audio?
Yeah, they can't.
We got you, Bob.
Okay, are you back in now?
Yep.
All right,
Yeah.
I just unplugged it and replugged it in here, so I hope it stays. So what is it that you would like to know? Because I think Tom did a very good job of explaining that, you know, the floodway is made up of the floodplain is made up of flood fringe and floodway, and the floodway is on the map that's shown on the screen. That's the area in blue. That's the area that takes stuff away, you know, and FEMA is very adamant in what it takes to develop in the floodway. FEMA does allow in the flood fringe, and flood fringe is kind of the backwaters. And then I guess, you know, I hear this all the time from people. Well, I've never seen it flood. And I always tell people, well, consider yourself lucky, because the fact that it hasn't flooded is no indication that this event won't occur. And even though it's a statistical 100-year event, it could never happen. It could happen twice in a row in 2 days, depending on the storm event. So it is a floodplain, and if our floodplain ordinance does allow development in the flood fringe if certain standards are met. They're only going to have to fill 2 feet above. You know, none of the floors can be below below the base flood elevation. They're going to have to be filled 2 feet above. They're going to provide dry land access. But if those things are met, at least the standards of the floodplain ordinance can, we can approve that way. That doesn't mean that it's a good idea to do that. That's what our ordinance currently says. So is there any other questions about the floodplain that I haven't addressed, or you need a little bit more background information on?
Thanks, Mr. Colson. Are there any other questions? Ms. Dahlman, do you have any further comments?
I just want to thank Tom and Bob for clarifying all of this. I mean, this is something new that I'm dealing with as a realtor, and you learn new things all the time in this business.
Right.
So I appreciate you educating us on what these things are. As a person that doesn't have the experience with Dunn County as far as the land use and those types of things, I mean, we're looking at the variety of maps that Bob has provided us. Obviously, this one here that we're looking at with the floodplain, flood fringe. We also look at the DNR wetlands map and the buildable area. If you can scroll to that, Tom. I don't know where it's at here. We've got lots of maps. Nope. There should be another. So this one right here. So, we're looking at the floodplain, flood fringe map and looking like, oh, yep, we might be okay. A person may be able to build there. We're looking at this wetland map and the buildable area possibly that, we talked about with Bob maybe being able to happen. You look at the wetlands map and there's an area up in that northeast corner that is not in the wetlands either. So, like I said, we're looking at it like, well, why not? And we understand the regulations and things that you guys have developed over the years, and obviously we'll be respectful of those. But we're looking at these things as a kind of an outsider, not really knowing all the history and wondering, why not? So that's why we're here today. You talked about the financial hardship. Does it create financial hardship for the Larsens? Well, if they can't sell this, yeah, it would. Obviously, it's more appealing to a buyer if they can build there. Does that make it right? I go back to Tom, your comment. I think it was you that made it. Two wrongs don't make a right. We understand that as well. But we're just trying to voice our opinion. I know Tanya's going to talk here and kind of talk about their personal side of this. But thank you guys for listening. We appreciate you giving us the opportunity to come in and talk about this and at least hear us out. So thanks again.
Thank you for your comments. Does anybody on the committee have questions of Ms. Dahlman? Okay. Ms. Larsen, would you like to make some comments?
I'm not sure what all I have to add to that. I just, like Wendy said, we appreciate you guys taking the time to listen to why we're wanting to section off that piece. As a landowner, just because it's on the other side of the river, it's very hard to utilize that property. And we do run cattle and we, are trying to take care of the land that we have. And it's just really hard to do that on that other side. As far as trying to get around the ordinance and add extra land, anything that we would try and add would be landlocked, and that's not beneficial to us or to whoever would try and buy it. So that's why we were hoping to be able to do just the 13.5 acres. And I know it's not, we haven't been here 100 years either, but I do know that upper piece right directly across from the Sheridan Township, if somebody were to add landfill, which is, what they would have to do, it would take it out of the floodplain. But again, like Tom said, it's the difference between the zoning and the surveying. So we're going to abide by whatever you say. We were just hoping that you would take it into consideration that, you know, sectioning that off would be beneficial to whoever buys it and to us too, just because it is hard to get to.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee for Mr. Larson? Okay, thanks to both of you for taking the time to come in this obviously a difficult situation. Does the committee have any comments or questions or discussion?
Chair, Supervisor
Supervisor Kinnear, and then Supervisor Bartlett.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Now, I'm just trying to think back. Can't a landowner go and hire someone to delineate a parcel they believe does not fit in a floodplain? For example, if it's designated a floodplain and there's a parcel there that you say, hey, they didn't do that correctly, is it possible for a landowner to hire someone to delineate that piece? Maybe this is for Tom. I can't remember where we discussed this.
Yes, that is correct, Supervisor Kinnear. I don't deal with this. I've never done one as a professional land surveyor, but I've heard of them being done. I believe it's called a LOM R. It would have to be done by a licensed engineer or surveyor, and it's a form that FEMA requires. It involves collection of field data and basically proving that FEMA's mapping in the area is incorrect. That the data would all get submitted to FEMA, then FEMA would make a determination based on the data that was submitted and either concur with that determination or dispute it. If they disputed it, of course, the mapping would not be revised. If they concurred that the mapping was in error, then the maps would be amended for that area. And perhaps Bob Colson could speak a little more on this if he has more to add, but with my limited knowledge of this, that's how I believe that would happen. That option certainly is available, but keep in mind that would take some time and potentially bear some considerable expense in collecting that data. So it's kind of a risk reward type of situation. How much do you want to spend with no guarantee that you're going to get the desired result? So right now we have to use the data that's been adopted by FEMA. I mean, the county paid for the LIDAR data, which was collected. That data was analyzed by FEMA, and the maps were generated from it and certified. So right now that is our gold standard, but that standard certainly could be challenged, and that would be the mechanism for doing that. Yes.
Thank you, Tom. I was looking more at it as an alternative for the landowner if they felt there was some land that didn't fit. Yeah, thank you for the explanation.
Supervisor Bartlett.
Tom, you mentioned in your when you first brought this up at the end that making it a non-buildable parcel, that you would go with that recommendation or whatever. You could agree to that. Could you explain that to me a little bit more? Is there something on the deed then that it never can be built on, or if it Bob was talking about if fill was brought in or something, could it be built on afterwards sometime down the road? Can you explain that a little more, please?
Yes, thank you for the question. That's a very good question. The creation of this parcel is going to require a certified survey map unless the parcel were conveyed to an adjoiner. There's always exceptions. So let's just say, Mr. Huber decided to the north, he was going to buy this parcel. It would be a conveyance of land between adjoiners. It'd be totally exempt from our ordinance. That is not being proposed at the time and may never be proposed. So that leaves the Larsens having to comply with our ordinance, right? Because the parcel they're breaking off is under 20 acres. So it will require a certified survey map. That certified survey map, the parcel can't be designated as a lot right now because it doesn't meet the requirements of our ordinance unless a variance is granted. So when we talk about hardship and you know, so basically, you know, the question was asked by Ms. Larsen at one time, well, you're telling me then, Tom, I have an unsellable piece of land. And my response to that is no, the land still can be conveyed. It just couldn't be conveyed for building purposes. So what we would do is require that it be designated as an outlot. By definition, in our current ordinance and also in the ordinance, the draft ordinance that we will be taking up, hopefully next year and adopting, both of those ordinances define an outlot as a non-buildable parcel. So if the Larsens were to go ahead, hire a surveyor, have a certified survey map prepared, and designate this 13.5 acres roughly as outlot 1 on the map, by definition, it could not be built upon as a unit. The fact that it's labeled as an outlot on the map is enough in my mind. A separate document doesn't need to be recorded at the Register of Deeds, a deed restriction, if you will, anything like that. By definition, if somebody conveys this and they come in and try and get a building permit from the zoning office, the ordinance is very clear in the definition in the ordinance of an outlot. It's not to be built upon as a unit. Now, let's say, you know, there was a second part to your question, Dave, and that was if fill was brought in at a later date. So let's say we create an outlot, we get it recorded here in February, and then next year a bunch of fill is brought in, and now they can, I guess the committee decides to say we don't grant this variance, and a couple years from now the committee decides, they come back with a new variance request, they have a bunch of fill placed, maybe they place enough that they can get a 1/4 of an acre that's above the 2-foot freeboard. I'm not sure, but let's just say circumstances change and now the committee is in favor of that. That outlot would have to be surveyed, like resurveyed and designated as a lot, a new certified survey map and designated as a lot, which would allow building on it. So the land right now is not, you know, unsaleable. It just, in its current condition, if the variance isn't granted, it would be unsaleable for residential purposes. It could be sold as hunting land. Bob Colson mentioned to me at one time that, you know, some type of an RV could be put on the property for so many months out of the year, but would have to be removed for a certain amount of time as well. So it's not that, you know, this is just a bad piece of property, can never be used for anything. It's just right now the ordinance doesn't allow it to be labeled as a lot, which would allow for residential purposes without the granting of a variance. So kind of long-winded on that, but I hope I answered your question. Staff certainly would support a survey of the property designating it as an outlot. It could be sold as such, and no building for residential purpose, or actually no building for any purposes would be allowed on it as long as it were designated as an outlot. And
Question, Tom?
And we would support that.
Yeah, Supervisor Bjork.
If fill was brought in, would you just have to have enough fill for the building site, the house itself, or for the whole 10,000 square feet?
That's a good question. I believe the floodplain ordinance, which I don't administer, I don't believe that floodplain ordinance, and having not read it in a while, I don't think there's a 10,000 square foot requirement in that. So to satisfy the floodplain ordinance, I think certainly a smaller area could be filled and brought up to a certain elevation, certainly less than 10,000 square feet. Bob can correct me on that if I'm wrong. As far as the survey ordinance is concerned, though, it still wouldn't meet that 10,000 contiguous square foot requirement. So I guess in order to meet that, I would say that enough fill would have to be brought in to meet that requirement. Otherwise, a variance would have to be requested. I mean, we're talking a lot of fill, a 1/4 of an acre, and you'd have to bring that up, you know, right now 985. So we're looking at 987, and that building site's at 984. So you'd have to fill a quarter of an acre at a depth of 3 feet. It doesn't seem practical to me to do that. I think, certainly the variance would be the better option, and that's why the Larsens are choosing to go that route at this point.
One other question, Tom?
Sure.
If they would buy some land to the east from that Mike Wold, would the road separate that parcel?
Correct. Roads, there's an Attorney General's opinion that roads are parcel dividers. So public highways, and in this case, the county highway is actually owned in fee title by Dunn County. So public highways break contiguity of parcels. So even if, let's just say, the Larsens owned land where Mike Wold does on the east side of the highway, they couldn't just lump that together and cross the highway, if you will. That highway breaks the contiguity of parcels. So not an option.
Mr. Chair, can you hear me?
Yeah, Mr. Colson.
I would like to just clarify, in terms of not giving undue hope. If it were deemed an outlot, I don't see that and it's shoreline. I don't see that zoning would allow the filling to end run this decision. It would seem that if the decision is to make it an outlot, that the decision is an outlot, and it would be very difficult for zoning to say, well, we're going to allow you to do an end run around what the county's decision was and bring in fill so that you can build on it. I would have a hard time with that decision to say, yeah, you could do that. So just to be clear, I don't want to give a lot of undue hope, that, well, then we'll just get an outlot and then we'll just fill it and now we have our building site. It's complicated, and I guess we would really look at the intent and the reasoning behind why it was deemed an outlot.
Okay. Other questions? So we've been asked to approve a variance on this, and we've had discussion and a lot of good information provided. Is there a discussion within the committee or an indication of what direction the committee would like to go with regard to approving or denying this request? Tough question. Is the hesitancy because there's a feeling of a need for more information or more discussion? Okay. To see if I can move things off dead center, I will make a motion to deny the variance request based on the testimony today. I'm wondering if there's be a second to that motion.
Mr. Chairman, I will second that.
And is there further discussion?
Supervisor Kinnear, Mr. Chair?
Yes, Supervisor Kinnear.
As difficult as it is to say no, it seems that we have no choice in this case. It's the ordinance, but it's also a practical matter too. I look at it, Tom talked about the flood possibilities, and the ordinance is there for a reason, and I think it's a good reason. So I'd have to go along with the move as you made, Mr. Chair.
Any other comments? They're really tough decisions. While hearing no more comments or questions, I will call a question. All in favor of the motion to deny the variance, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. I have 3 ayes, I think.
Aye.
But there are 4 ayes then, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Those opposed to the resolution, say nay.
Huh?
Okay. Anyone opposed to the resolution to deny the variance? Okay, so I have, correct me if I'm wrong, I have 4 ayes and 2, is there anyone abstaining from the vote? You don't have to indicate, but what I have are
not gonna vote.
Okay, I have 4 ayes and 2, I guess, abstentions.
I voted aye.
You did, okay. Then I can't see everybody on the screen, I'm sorry. So I think we have 5 ayes and 1 abstention. Am I correct in that? Anyone want to correct me? So that is the resolution we've adopted, and appreciate the discussion and the work the staff did on it. Tough, hard decisions. And thank you to the citizens who provided testimony information to us today.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I really would like to compliment staff on this. As you have suggested, it's a hard decision, but clearly the staff has acted in what I consider to be the best interests of the county. I'm sorry for the applicants, but I think this is a correct decision. And thank you, Tom and Bob, for your work on this.
Thanks, Tom. Okay, if there's no other comments on it, we'll move on to the next item. Thanks, everybody. So the next item, 8B, is review and take action on a variance request from Mike Garrett's to waive section 6.301 of the Dunn County subdivision ordinance. But Tom, you want to sort of walk us through this?
Sure, I'd be glad to. I'll give you a little background here. We are in the plat of Picnic Point. It's an older plat in Dunn County, situated on the north side of Lake Tainer. And the request from Mr. Garrett's is he's asking for a variance again to waive section 16.3.01A sub 1 through 9 of the county subdivision ordinance, requiring the preparation of a certified survey map on both a parcel of land he intends to divide off and transfer, as well as the remainder of his parent parcel. So I will give you a little background. While I'm doing so, I'm going to pull up a different. So can everybody see this on the screen? This is our county parcel mapping. So here's your background. Mike Garrett's, the applicant, owns a parent parcel of land comprised of 3 separate tax parcels. This triangle on the corner, we've got another rectangular parcel here and another smaller parcel down here. So he owns all 3 of those with different tax identification numbers. So his parent parcel is part of Outlot 1 of the plat of Picnic Point Edition, which here's a copy of the plat, and here's Outlot 1. Hope everybody can see that. So it's an older plat, recorded 1923, 1924. So his parcel is just a small piece of this outlot situated way up in this northwest corner. Represented again here by these 3 tax IDs. So the applicant, so the property is currently zoned R1. The applicant would like to create a new parcel in the northwesterly corner of the parent parcel, which includes an existing structure that's in need of repair. So these 2 gray roofed buildings here do not exist. This building right here in the middle, or the southerly partition of this building, has since been removed. This is a newer pole shed here with a shiny roof, and the northerly portion of this gray roofed building still exists, and we'll see some pictures of that here in a little bit. So again, the applicant would like to parcel off a part of this triangular parcel by running a line somewhere where my hand is here and up and over to Miss Barlow, who lives directly across here at E6436. She has a piece of lakefront property. So he wants to parcel that off. includes an existing structure that's in need of some repairs. This new parcel is intended to be conveyed to Jean, who I mentioned owns a residence directly across. Ms. Barlow has indicated that she's willing to make improvements to the existing structure and maintain the property. The creation of this new lot requires the preparation of a certified survey map. So everybody should be more than well aware at this point. Anytime you create a new parcel in Dunn County that's under 20 acres, a certified survey map is required. So this parcel that Mr. Garrett's would like to convey to Jean is under 20. And then we also look at the remainder of what he owns. If that remainder falls below that 20 acre threshold, that remainder also requires mapping as a lot of a certified survey map. So we're looking at what he wants to do is going to require a 2-lot certified survey map, or at least creating 2 parcels with a certified survey map. And that's strictly driven by 16.3.01A sub 1 through 9 of our subdivision condominium ordinance. So the applicant has contracted with a land surveyor who was unable at this time to determine the location of the east line of the parent parcel. So this line right here between Mr. Garrett's and Mr. Schultz, that line cannot be determined according to the surveyor. So a certified survey map was initially planned for both of the subject parcels. However, the uncertainty over the easterly property line no longer makes that option viable. Because of the uncertainty, the surveyor for the applicant has proposed to describe an agreed upon line between Ms. Barlow and the piece that's going to be retained by the applicant, Mr. Garrett's. So under this scenario, no certified survey map would be prepared. Section 16.4.05 of our ordinance allows for a variance request. I'm not going to go through the verbiage again. I already did it on the prior variance request, but so everybody's aware our ordinance does allow for variances. So I'm going to get into the analysis here that staff has undertaken. So we have reviewed the applicant's request. The plat of Picnic Point was recorded in August of 1924. That plat makes no reference to any type of physical lot corners or markers. Here's the plat again. It's very basic. It's how plats were done years ago. So there's no reference on the plat to any type of monumentation. It's also common knowledge that many local surveyors avoid working in this plat either due to the lack of lot corner monumentation, or in some cases, they find monumentation that does not agree with the platted dimensions or long-established lines of occupation. In the recent past, several adjoining landowners in this plat have agreed upon common lines after hiring surveyors who couldn't locate the lines. So what they did is they got together and said, okay, this is where we want the line to be. Mr. Surveyor, write a description for us, and we will quit claim some deeds back and forth and make that our agreed upon property line, which is a very good way to handle things when there is uncertainty involved. So those conveyances, which some of them were directly across the road, were between adjoining landowners and were exempt from the requirements of Chapter 16 of our ordinance based on State Statute 236.45, which requires which allows for conveyances between adjoiners to not be subject to local subdivision review or regulation. The applicant in this situation, Mr. Garrett's, he doesn't have that luxury. He owns all of this. Jean Barlow, as we discussed earlier in our meeting, her property is not considered an adjoiner to Mr. Garrett's because of the town road issue. That town severs the contiguity, or in this case, severs the adjoining concept of these two properties. So we don't have the situation, the option of just describing a line, which has happened directly across the road on several occasions. One of which Mr. Garrett's was part of, and it worked extremely well. I think he would agree to that. That option is not available to him at this point. We don't have an adjoining landowner situation. So he's in turn then asking for a variance that would allow him to have his surveyor describe a line and do some quit claim deeds without having a complete boundary survey of either of the two parcels. So in the opinion of the department, is that granting of a variance would not be detrimental to the public health, safety, and welfare. It would serve to encourage the most appropriate use of the two parcels, the existing non-conforming structures. So again, these are non-conforming structures. They are located on an outlot. So the existing non-conforming structures could continue to be used for their original intended purposes. Any improvements to those non-conforming structures made by either Ms. Barlow or Mr. Garrett's would need to comply with the Dunn County zoning ordinance. In addition, the county would realize a tax benefit. No additional improvements could ever be placed on either of the two subject parcels unless they were surveyed as lots on a certified survey map. So again, we need to look at the variance requirements, which I will go through here. We're talking about undo. It would be inappropriate to apply literally the provisions of our ordinance because an exceptional or undue hardship would exist. The applicant has contacted several surveyors who all refused to work in this platted area except for one. The surveyor he hired conducted preliminary work and was unable to locate any monuments needed to establish the boundary lines of his parent tract. The applicant is facing an undue hardship which is not self-imposed. If he is not granted this variance, he will be unable to convey a portion of the property to Ms. Barlow. And then we need to look at the purpose of our ordinance. The purpose of the regulations of our ordinance is to promote public health, safety, and welfare, to encourage the most appropriate use of the land and provide the best possible environment for human habitation, and to conserve the value of buildings placed upon the land by, and we've got A through G here to analyze. So item A, reducing congestion in the streets or highways. The parcel intended to be conveyed as well as the remnant parcel both have their own separate existing driveways. Dividing the property would not introduce a new driveway, which could result in an increase in congestion. Item B, furthering the orderly layout and use of the land. Several other neighboring landowners in the area own property on both sides of 867th Avenue. Dividing the property and conveying a portion to a neighbor across the street, in this case Ms. Barlow, would be consistent with other ownership in the immediate area. Item C, securing safety from fire, panic, and other dangers. There are existing non-conforming structures on both of the subject parcels, so any safety concerns or other dangers that may be present now would also likely be present in the future. Providing adequate light and air. There is an existing non-conforming structure on each of the subject parcels. Since the parcels are part of an outlot, no new structures would ever be allowed, so the adequacy of light and air should not be affected. Avoiding undue or improper concentration of population. Neither one of these parcels is intended to be used for residential purposes, so the concentration of population should or would not be affected. Facilitating adequate provisions for transportation, water, sewer, schools, parks, playgrounds, and other public requirements. That item is non-applicable under the circumstances we're faced with. And then item G, facilitating where appropriate further re-subdivision of larger tracts into smaller parcels. Neither the parcel to be conveyed nor the remnant meet the minimum area requirements to be further subdivided. So that would not be an issue. So at the end of all this analyzation, our staff recommendation is that we certainly recommend approval of the variance request. We feel it would be consistent with the ordinance and not be harmful to public health, safety, or general welfare. There are some other supporting documents here. I guess the plat, I presented that. I really don't have any other supporting documents other than an excerpt from the ordinance that requires a certified survey map on this. I think it does deserve a slight bit of more explanation. You know, committee members may be wondering, well, how can we do this without an official boundary survey? What would happen is that a line, an agreed upon line, would be staked out on the ground, which would delineate the common line between the piece Ms. Barlow is going to be deeded and the piece Mr. Garrett's is going to keep. And that description would read something similar to, you know, all that part of Outlot 1 lying westerly of the following described line. And then the surveyor would provide a legal description. There would be irons in the ground monumenting that line. There would not be an area per se on the parcel being deeded because we don't have a complete boundary done. But it certainly would be a valid legal description to convey everything westerly of a described line that's located within that outlot. Perfectly valid legal description could be recorded that way, title transferred, and there would still be some uncertainty on, you know, where is the west line and the north line of Ms. Barlow's parcel. But the legal description could be done that way, and similar descriptions, like I said, have been done directly across the road between adjoining landowners in the same identical fashion. They described a line, quit claim to that line, quit claim deeds, and the new title lines then are reflected based on those recorded documents. So it makes sense to me. It may not make complete sense to the committee members. So if you need further explanation, I will do my best to do that. But at the end of the day, we are not going to have a complete boundary survey on either one of these parcels. So that concludes my report. And I will turn it back over to Chair Quinn at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Carlson. Any questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Gary.
I have like 2 questions. Because that's an outlet, they can like maintain the buildings, but they can't build any more new ones. Is that correct?
Yes, zoning would not issue any permits for any new footprints on there, any new structures, so that, you know, the buildings they have, they can maintain those. But zoning would not issue any permits for any other structures, and that's going to mean just about anything. So what they have, they can keep, but they're not getting anything else.
And my second question is that line between the Garris and Schultz that cannot be determined. What does the tax parcel legal description say? You know, how can you have with no line there, how can you have a legal description for a tax purpose?
I can attempt to answer that, and Supervisor Bjork, I don't have the deed in front of me. I did review the deed probably, I would say it's at least a month ago, and the deed starts at the corner, comes over a certain distance, goes down a bearing in a distance. Again, without having it in front of me, it's very hard to say exactly how it was described. But apparently when the surveyor tried placing that description on the ground, he, number one, couldn't find any irons out there. I don't know the whole situation. I haven't talked to the surveyor. All I know is that the surveyor indicated to Mr. Garretts, and maybe Mr. Garretts can shed some more light on what or what not his surveyor did find. But I know at the end of the day, the surveyor was not comfortable and or could not certify to a boundary on the ground on where this property was located. I know other surveyors, in addition to this surveyor, have run into the same problems on the other side of the road on the lake side, and basically went to the landowners, one of which was Mr. Garretts, who's, you know, going to speak here in a moment. But he was involved in some of those transactions on the other side of the road where property lines could not be determined with any degree of certainty. And I guess that's the word I want to stress here. There's uncertainty over these property lines. So I don't know if I'm answering your question. I mean, to answer your question, yes, there is a deed on the property, there is a legal description, but placing that description on the ground, there's uncertainty over that.
Thank you.
And I guess the other point I want to make is there is a line that you're seeing on the map here. There's, you know, hundreds of thousands of parcels in Dunn County that are mapped, right, wrong, or other. Every parcel has got some lines drawn around it. Some of those lines are very accurate, some are not. So, and I get it, you know, some may be questioning, well, if the parcel can't be surveyed, how can we have this map? Well, I just really want to stress this map is not 100% accurate. It's a best representation based on the information we have. So it's a digital plat book, that's all it is. So hopefully I answered your question on that.
Any other questions? Mr. Garretts, are you on the call? Would you,
yes, sir.
You have any comments?
I'd just like to say I think Tom did a great job explaining what I want to do and what the intended use of the building is. And he did tell you that the that center building had been removed, so there's 2 separate buildings now. And if we place the new line, the new map of survey in between the 2 structures, both of them would be meeting side yard setback. is you can see the picture that's up there now. That is the building that I want to sell to Jean across the road. She has owned that property for over 40 years on the lake, and she always said she wished she had a garage for it. So this is a great opportunity for her to purchase this property and improve it and maintain it. And I simply do not have a use for it. Tom, if you'll scroll down a little bit more, you'll probably see the building that I did remodel. So that is part of the complex that was there. You can see the other building in the background where there is 32 feet between the buildings now. And that building will be used for storage. I live basically kitty corner across from it. I'm one lot away from Jean's. So I guess if there's any questions, I'll try to answer them.
Any questions? I do have a kind of an ancillary question that you mentioned earlier. I think Tom mentioned that, or maybe it was Bob, that the buildings, the footprint of the buildings can be maintained, but that the use must be maintained also. So these buildings could not be converted to residential use as in a designated.
Correct. They would maintain just the use as storage.
Right.
And if you see, across the road on the lake lots, several of the houses along the lake do have garages across the road. And that is basically what I'm doing here. I'm keeping the one garage for myself and want to convey the other garage to Jean. So.
Okay. All right. Any questions? Anyone care to make a motion? One way or the other?
Supervisor Kinnear, I'd make a motion that we grant the variance.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I will second, Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Morehouse, thank you. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Thanks, Mike, for coming on.
All right, thank you.
Let's see. Now we'll go back up to
6C.
Item 6C. Mr. Colson.
Yes, this is an ongoing kind of question that we get on a fairly regular basis. We're all getting older. Most of us have kids, and it's not unusual that the kids would like mom and dad or grandma close by, as they age to take care of them. The problem we have is that our ordinance does not allow a second dwelling on a parcel, and those are most commonly known as mother-in-law suites. And so Mr. Breen has contacted me and was asking, if we consider that. And this was actually, I don't know if any of you were on the committee when the ordinance was rewritten, but this was brought up at the time that the ordinance was rewritten, and it was discussed. And one of the reasons that the committee opted not to pursue this mother-in-law suite idea is because fact of life is none of us live forever, and so we put up this mother-in-law suite and moved grandma in, and grandma goes to visit grandpa in heaven, and now we have a second dwelling on there, and chances are it's going to be seen as an income generator, and it will be rented out because that's just probably what's going to happen. In the past, what we've asked people to do is split the land, carve off a piece and build on a separate parcel so that mom or grandma or whoever can be next door. And then when that use changes, well, now you can sell that piece of property, or you can rent that because it would be a separate parcel. There wouldn't be two on a single parcel. Some of the other things that we have done is said, well, what you can do is you could add on to your existing home to allow for a place, for your loved ones to live, and then you could, could keep that, I doubt that anyone would take that down, but then you could use that in the future for whatever. Typically what, what we would do is not allow or discourage, a complete separate unit with full kitchen and everything. But so yeah, I don't know how to address this or to deal with this in a way that meets the intent of our ordinance. And so zoning really feels that it would be a maintenance nightmare to allow this, and then for us to go out and once the use changes, to monitor that indeed it's not a second residence on a single parcel. So I guess I personally, as the zoning administrator, don't like, I support the idea of a mother-in-law suite or having a place to care for loved ones. I just don't think that having two residences on a parcel is in the county's best interest. And it, and not that everyone, but I don't know that somebody wouldn't come in and say, well, it's for my grandma, and then they build it and then say, well, grandma decided not to live here, and now we're just going to rent it out. And so there's a lot of negatives. There are some positives, but it would require an amendment to the ordinance if the committee wanted to pursue this at all. And maybe some of the things that to consider would be maybe changes in the language so that we could address this in terms of adding on to an existing structure. Right now, we just recommend that. It doesn't spell that out in the ordinance, but restricting that from being a duplex, a second complete unit. But so I guess that's kind of the background on it. And so I guess I bring it up to the committee more for discussion, because I don't know that either all or most of you were in the discussions when this came up. And so with that, I will turn it back over to the committee for questions, comments.
Okay, thanks, Bob. Any thoughts? Again, this is Bob is raising this as something that we would, as a committee, decide to undertake as a discussion and then possible action depending upon the course of the discussion. So no specific timeline, but just is this something we want to look at? Any questions or thoughts?
Comment, Mr. Chairman?
Sure.
If a person decided to add on a couple rooms to the house for your mother-in-law, would that have to be rezoned to be a duplex then? Because there's two kind of separate living facilities in one building?
Well, if the language said that you couldn't have a kitchen, then it would be adding bedrooms somewhere else, on your home. They have to make sure that the septic system is sized accordingly or to be upgraded, to accommodate that additional use. But if we restricted it so that it wasn't a kitchen, the person living there could probably, work with a microwave and a hot plate, and then have kind of a makeshift kitchen. But that would be fine for that use. But what it would do is in the future, when that use changes, it's very difficult for someone to come in and say, well, I don't have a place to store food or to prepare food. And so it's really not going to be very conducive to most people as a living quarters.
So, the question is, if you build something like this, you generally are going to want to have, or often are going to want to have a more or less inclusive unit that does have cooking facilities in it. I know we did that in our house, but then the question then is, it becomes a multifamily unit at that point in time. And is that an appropriate zoning classification for that unit? Is that kind of the way you're looking at it, Bob?
Yes, and it would not. So duplexes are only allowed in the R2 and R3. They're not allowed in the general ag or in the ag districts, and they aren't allowed in the residential district. And so we were very clear when we did the rewrite to separate duplexes as a use from residential. So it would not be allowed without a rezone.
I think it's really a important discussion, and it ties in with some of the discussions that are probably happening in the community committee that's dealing with housing, just in terms of providing affordable or accessible housing to a diverse part of our community. So I would support us looking at it. It might be a little bit naughty, some naughty questions, but there's also some real opportunities. Other thoughts?
Mr. Chairman?
Yep.
Yeah, I think I would support further discussion. I do have a question for Mr. Coulson. How frequently are you contacted with a request that would be similar to this for accessory dwelling unit? Does it happen a lot?
Well, it happens, you know, a lot is relative, but we do get these requests, you know, 6-8 times a year, you know, so, you know, if that's a lot, yeah, but they are, but it isn't like one and done. We do get these requests on a recurring basis.
Okay. Yeah, and I apologize for my precise language a lot. Sorry.
All right. Other thoughts? Any concerns about dipping our toe in this discussion? Obviously, time is a consideration and resources, but we have to trust Bob to be thoughtful about leading us in that direction.
If
okay.
I guess I'll let the committee kind of finish up, and I maybe have some follow-up. So
I think we're done. So what do you got?
Well, I guess I would be curious as to what information would you want me to bring back? Do you want me to bring back something that shows that we would allow, you know, some language that would allow it, or do you want me to go and find stuff in terms of what other people have done, and what do you think that would be helpful to understand this better?
Mr. Chairman?
Sure.
I think it would be real. I mean, I understand time constraints, since this is not something that I want you to put on the priority list, but it would be, I think, helpful to see what other counties have done on this.
Yeah, I agree. Some examples of areas that you think have done it successfully.
Or
would
not.
be really helpful, or not. Yeah, or problems that have been created. Yeah.
I can certainly reach out to my counterparts. That's a fairly straightforward exercise.
And I didn't look, Bob, at the links you submitted yet, but will those take us to some of that information?
I didn't look at those links yet either, to be honest. I just wanted to make sure, you know, I didn't want to get too far in the weeds if it wasn't necessary. So, you know, I will look at those links as well and see if there's some stuff in there that might be of benefit to the committee.
Okay. Okay. Anything else from anybody?
I don't know that this will be on the next agenda, but I will put it on my things to do list, and it will be coming back soon. But we'll leave it at that.
Okay. I think I'm not with limited confidence that I say we've covered our whole agenda, because I often miss something. Did I miss anything? Okay. Any announcements? I would make one announcement, I guess, and that's we decided to have a meeting on the 22nd of December, which is a little unusual, but we're going to act on the 2 ordinances we have before us and try and get those done. And I think that will be the last meeting for Dan Prestobach, our land conservation manager. So I'm hoping you're going to be here, Dan.
I'm planning on being there.
Okay,
yes.
So we can say goodbye to you and thank you for your work. My understanding from talking with administration is that they have agreed to that. They have sent out the request for applications for the position, And that if those are received back, the plan is to have initial interviews on December 15th. I have been invited to participate in those interviews. And then we have let the administration know that the committee, the full committee, would like to interview finalists. So that whether it be 2 or 3, maybe 2, and that would happen also as part of our 22nd meeting. So I'm not sure exactly how we'll do that, but I'll provide some time in your schedule if you could, so we can all look at them. And any questions about that?
No, just a comment here. I appreciate Chairman Quinn's extra activity. It's not just at the meetings and getting ready for them, but I know you're keeping things going and up to date in the background. And so thanks for this information too. Appreciate your work.
Thanks, Mike. Okay.